Hi, everyone. Welcome back for day 2 of exploring the dystopian depths of wool. I'm Leah.
And I'm Mike.
And we're going to go a little bit more to the dark side, or wait, do we go to the light side or to the dark side? Today, we're going to look at the idea of dystopian stories. We're going to look at the idea of utopian worlds, and we're going to talk about what it all means.
Absolutely. If you're a fan of science fiction, you've probably noticed in the last 5, 10, even 20 years, a lot of science fiction stories being not quite as hopeful, maybe, as the stories that we saw when we were younger. Star Trek and Star Wars seem to have somewhat or very hopeful views of the future. Right? With people living in common and living in peace and alien races getting along together. Or
and
at
the
least,
bad guys were actual bad guys.
Right,
and the good guys were only
really
good guys.
Bad, and the good guys would often team up with different, alien races and fight this one evil bad guy. But today, often science fiction is kind of grim. It's kind of depressing. But in some ways, it models or it matches or it mirrors the world we live in. A lot of the world today can be kind of grim. We're facing environmental catastrophes with global warming. Well, many of our science fiction stories are in worlds like that. And also with the threat of, of war and violence and, conflict between peoples around the world, we often see those stories also reflected. And put on top of that, a general fear and an unease with modern technology and how it's affecting our world and our lives.
And how deeply it can affect our lives.
And our relationships. Yeah. And, we see shows like Black Mirror that kind of talk about that. So all of this science fiction is very interesting. It's very popular. It really drives people's imaginations. But it comes from a place. So we're going to find out all about that, which relates not only to the history of science fiction, but to the future of it, and also to, hopefully, not the future that we all live in.
But first, let's listen to the article one time.
American writer Hugh Howey's Wool began as a self-published science fiction short story. Its success led to subsequent short novels and an expansion into the famous Silo series. These gripping works have captured the imagination of readers worldwide and inspired an Apple TV Plus adaptation, which brings its carefully crafted dystopian world to an even wider audience. To appreciate this kind of imaginary world, we should first understand the concept of utopia. Coined by Sir Thomas More in his 1516 book of the same name, the term describes an ideal world of absolute harmony in social, political, and moral aspects. Appealing as it sounds, utopia is too good to be true in reality. The fact that utopia is impossible is explicitly suggested by the term's origin in ancient Greek, in which it translates as no place. In sharp contrast, dystopia presents a society of conflict, terror, and despair. To create a grim future of an alternate reality, dystopian narratives like Wool tend to have some common elements. These include dreadful environmental disasters that disrupt the world order, totalitarian governments that carry out constant surveillance, and the loss of individual freedoms. Dystopian stories closely examine the struggles faced by individuals under tight control, prompting them to question and defy the current system. The purpose of dystopian fiction is more than just to entertain. It acts as a mirror, reflecting the possible extreme consequences of existing social issues. Each step taken by the characters in the story inspires readers to critically assess our social values. Such stories teach us to steer clear of the dystopian visions portrayed and work toward a more hopeful future.
Our first sentence today starts out with American writer Hugh Howey's Wool began as a self-published science fiction short story.
Really?
I found this very interesting. He was self-published, right? This means that he decided that he wrote the short story. He's like, I'm going to do something with this. So he went out and instead of getting somebody to publish it for him, he did it himself. He did it through a small publishing company. And then he did something really cool. He did it through Amazon Kindle Direct, and he was really popular with it. It's kind of like, in my mind, how Justin Bieber got popular on YouTube and, well, all of a sudden he's a big famous star, or Shawn Mendes got popular on Vine and then was a big famous star. He is one of the few people who has had this kind of success with the Amazon Kindle Direct, where he then got, big contracts with companies around the world for his project after it being self-published, published by himself. A science fiction short story. I just want to go off here real quick. Blade Runner was a really great one. When we get into dystopian worlds, Blade Runner fits real well. 1984 by George Orwell, written in 1949. All the Matrix series, Hunger Games, The Handmaid's Tale, A Clockwork Orange. And if you're a video game player, you can't leave out Fallout, which is like this weirdly terrifying game and so innocent looking at the same time. And these are all bringing in dystopian worlds, which is what we're going to go into today.
Exactly. So he had great success by self-publishing his own work. I guess eventually it got picked up by a big publishing company to actually make books. But he was also very prolific. That means he was producing a lot of stuff. He did subsequent short novels. So he expanded it from a short story to a short novel. Sometimes we call those novellas. Novellas are very good to turn into television shows and movies because they often don't have too much story. And then he eventually expanded it into the famous Silo series. And I believe there are at least 3 books in this series. There's Wool, there's Dust, and there's something else. I'm not quite sure. I don't remember the other one. I only read one of them. But they were very, very popular, and you can still find them on bookstore shelves all over the world in many languages. That's how popular they became. And of course, since it was a popular book, someone said, hey, that can be a popular movie or TV show. And so that's what they did, partly because they're gripping. It says these gripping works have captured the imagination of readers worldwide and inspired an Apple TV Plus adaptation, which brings its carefully crafted dystopian world to an even wider audience. Again, very similar to things like the Hunger Games that you mentioned, popular books, then become popular movies.
Absolutely.
And if a story is described as gripping, it's thrilling. It holds on to you.
Fascinating.
Grip is to hold on to something quite tightly. You would grip the bat as you swing it while playing baseball. You might grip the pole as you ride on a Taipei bus when the drivers drive like they're in some kind of car race. You got to hold on very tightly. You grip someone's hand when you're shaking their hand or where you're helping them stand up by pulling onto them. And we can also use it, to talk about a work of art, especially a story, a tale, an anecdote. If it holds on to you, if it enthralls you, and if it fascinates you, if it grabs all your attention and holds on to your attention until the end, in other words, if it's not boring, if it's the exact opposite of boring, but exciting or thrilling or something like that, you can describe it as gripping, and it's captured the imagination of readers worldwide. It's really attracted people. It's got a lot of fans. A lot of people are saying, these are great books. You got to read them. And since they were such great and popular books, they inspired an Apple TV Plus adaptation. So that made the people at Apple TV say, hey, we have an idea. Here are books. Let's turn them into a TV show. And we'll make millions and people will be entertained. And what's an adaptation? An adaptation means a slight variation on the book. So they've taken the books and they've cut them a little bit, maybe changed a few of the characters, Basically, they kind of edit it and update it and make it a bit more appealing to TV audiences and also make it easier to film for TV by not being so long or not having so many characters and that kind of thing. So often when they take a book and turn it into a TV show or a movie, it'll be an adaptation. If you're a fan of the book, you'll go and go, hey,
Wait.
They cut out my favorite scene, or who's that character? That was two people
There was no love interest before.
That kind of thing, exactly, because people like love interests, and they don't like 5-hour-long movies, and they don't need 300 characters whose names they can't remember, so they change it. And this brings its carefully crafted dystopian world, there's that word, to an even wider audience. So let's talk about dystopian worlds and their history in both entertaining and terrifying us.
Well, the thing that's really interesting is that most of the time people like the dystopian world on screen, more than they're going to like a utopian world, which is what we're going to talk about in a minute.
That's boring.
Because everything's good in a utopian world, right? So to appreciate this kind of imaginary world, this kind of dystopian world, one should first probably understand the concept of utopia. An imaginary world means a world that doesn't actually exist. It's make-believe, kind of like Alice in Wonderland going down, the rabbit hole and having the mad tea party. None of that really happened. She fell asleep and had a dream. It was an imaginary world. It was in her imagination. But here, if we want to understand this imaginary world of Silo, of the Wool books, we should first understand the concept of utopia. Now, instead of going into a definition of utopia, I'm just going to read this next sentence because I think it's a really good way. It is the original way, probably, of describing it. Coined by Sir Thomas More in his 1516 book of the same name, so of the name Utopia, the term utopia describes an ideal world of absolute harmony in social, political, and moral aspects. So coined by somebody means created by somebody or given, being made into a term by somebody. So Sir Thomas More did that in his book Utopia, and he describes it as this perfect, this ideal world where everything is perfect. It's absolute harmony. Everything just blends together. Everybody's like, oh, and everything's great. And not just, in a social realm where, John and Joe are talking to one another and everything's great and they get along all the time. Socially, everything's perfect. Political world, the deputy and the sheriff, they get along great. Everything goes well.
So
no
it's like
problems.
where Barbie lives?
Yes. Until, Ken goes over to
Ken
the
goes over, right.
And the moral aspect. So everybody morally agrees with what's going on. So it's all okay.
Mm-hmm. A perfect world, which of course, as most of us know, only exists in Barbie Land or maybe Lego Land or in a Disney movie or something like that, but not in the real world. And as it says, as appealing as it sounds, as wonderful as this would be, utopia is too good to be true in reality, right? There are criminals, there are bad people, there are greedy people, there are, problems happen, humans are human, we're not perfect in any way. So this is too good to be true in reality. It sounds good, but you will never find that in the real world. The fact that utopia is impossible is explicitly suggested by the term's origin in ancient Greek. Here's the little joke, in which it translates as no place. That's right. Sir Thomas More back in 1516, he was trolling us. He was like, I wrote this book about this place called Utopia. And everyone read it and go, wow, that's great. Where is this? And he says, it's no place. It doesn't exist. That's what the name means.
It's Nemo.
Kind of an impossible land that doesn't exist. So he said that explicitly, or that's explained explicitly, especially if you understand ancient Greek. If something is done explicitly, it's done very clearly. We're not hiding anything. We're not being cute. We're not kind of changing the term or playing with it. No, we're stating straight up to your face, no lie, no covering up, just pure 100% honesty. This is what exactly is happening. I'm not trying to hide it in any way. So that's a utopia. It's a wonderful place from a wonderful book, but it's a place that is impossible. It does not exist.
Let's take a little break now and listen to our Chinese teacher.
听众朋友大家好，我是安娜。我们今天要带大家从羊毛记来认识一下反乌托邦这个文学到底是什么样的东西。反乌托邦文学，难道有乌托邦文学？难道有乌托邦吗？有耶。好，可是我们在谈乌托邦之前呢，我们先看一下这个羊毛记其实是一个美国作家，他其实是之前呢在 Kindle Direct Publishing 的一个平台上面自己发表的一个创作的小说，然后后来因为实在是太成功了，甚至呢就是促成了后面的一系列中篇的小说，而且还扩展成很著名的末日地堡的系列。我们在文章一开始的第一段呢，就告诉我们这一些资讯。当然这个美国作家休豪伊他的羊毛记，我们刚刚说一开始是在一些平台上发表，那后面我们比较熟悉的末日地堡是什么呢？它其实就出现在这个第一段第3句的地方，后来已经变成 Apple TV 的电视剧。这里的第3句啊，有一个非限定用法的关系子句哦，就出现在比较后面一点的地方，逗点之后的which到句尾可以左右括号。 它代替的就是前面的 an Apple TV Plus adaptation。adaptation 还原成动词是 adapt 就有调整啦，或者是修改的意思。当然小说要变成电视剧会需要一些改编，不过基本上就是这个所谓的反乌托邦的这种文学架构。好，那当然如果要欣赏这种虚构的世界，我们刚刚就想说很重要的乌托邦到底是什么，接下来的第二段就会是重点咯。那乌托邦这个词其实是在1516年有一个 Thomas More 这个爵士啊，他在他的同名书籍当中所创造的一种理想世界。在这个理想世界当中，我们的社会政治道德方面就达到绝对和谐的一个理想概念。在第二段第二句这个地方有一个分词构句哦，因为句子一开始就出现了一个 coined by someone， 那很显然这个 coined 就是一个 PP 嘛，就是过去分词。coin 本来是前臂，但是当动词就有铸造或者是创造出某一个单词的意思，所以句子本来应该是 The term was coined by Sir Thomas More。 这个词 utopia 也就是第一句最后一个字，所谓的乌托邦其实是1516年由 Sir Thomas More 在他的书当中所创造出来。逗点之后的 the term 前面就被省略了原本应该有的一个连接词 and。 那接下来如果我们了解了乌托邦的这个概念之后，反乌托邦就会知道是什么意思了。那当然乌托邦这个绝对的这个理想世界，这种大同世界听起来是很吸引人啦，不过我们大家也知道怎么可能在现实世界当中几乎是不太可能的啊。可是第二段的第三句就是我们刚刚讲的这个概念，可它是有很重要的句型诶，这个重要句型就是 as 当 although 的倒装句。好，这第三句的第二个单字 as 我们特别把它抓出来，在这里就是 although 虽然，我们说虽然如何如何，但怎样怎样，如果 as 还有一个表 although 的功能的话，它是一个很特别的用法，通常都会形成倒装句。换句话说，句子本来应该是虽然听起来很吸引人 although it sounds appealing， 那我们当要强调好吸引人哦，虽然听起来是，我们就会把 although 省略掉，换成这里的 as 形成倒装 appealing as it sounds。 乌托邦真的是太好了，不可能实现的。逗点之后甚至还出现我们比较熟悉的 to 的句型，太怎么样以至于不能怎么样。好，所以乌托邦基本上不能够实现的这种事实呢，在古希腊语的这个词，这个 utopia 其实就已经明确的表示出来。因为其实 utopia 在古希腊语当中指的就是没有的这种地方。好，这个很特别哦，在第一段的最后一句第四句我们也不能放过，因为这里有一个 that 加上完整子句当成补语的概念。第四句啊，我们来看一下 the fact that， 我们把 that 到 impossible 左右用中括号括起来。当我们用中括号的时候，通常就是一个完整名词子句的概念。 The fact 有一件事，什么事呢？ That 这个连接词不能省略，但是也没有意义哦，后面加上的是一个完整子句，它其实就是一个等号的概念。这件事 the fact 是什么？就是 utopia is impossible， 乌托邦这是不可能的这件事情，后面才出现句子的真正动词，从 is 开始到后面。当然这句话最后面的逗点 in which 也要稍微看一下，为什么这里有一个 in 啊？因为 which 代替的是前面逗点的所谓的 origin。 那这个 origin 在古希腊语当中的 origin 它的起源是什么意思？在那样的意思当中，在希腊语的这个起源语当中呢，其实它就是被翻为 no place， 世界上根本就没有的地方。
All right, we're going to take a quick break and then we'll be right back. Okay, so we've talked about utopia. Now we're going to talk about dystopia. So in sharp contrast, so completely the opposite of utopia is dystopia, where it presents a society of conflict, terror, and despair. I don't know why, but when I read these sorts of words, I feel like I have to add more emphasis to it and make it sound dark and important. Conflict, terror, despair. Yeah, if you live in a society of conflict, war or battle or fighting against one man against another, life ain't grand. And if you're living in a world of terror where you don't know if you're going to get attacked or you don't know if you're going to be bombed or you don't know what's going to happen next, and you're terrified of the possibility of it, you're absolutely, completely, deeply scared. You are in terror and despair because you don't have anything working the way you want it to. Deep, deep sadness. You are really unable to find out maybe where you can find your next meal or how you can make enough money to live your next days. It is extremely, extremely, extremely dark. And that's very fitting for dystopia.
Absolutely. If you want an idea of it, just turn on your news and
Yep.
see what's going on in Ukraine or in Gaza or somewhere like that. Imagine that if that was the whole world, if that was the grim future that we all face. So to create a grim future, a kind of helpless, awful, dystopian future, and by putting an N on it, you can turn it into a very useful adjective, as we see, to create a grim future of an alternate reality, a future reality or a different reality. So this might be something that writers write, or also if you go back and look at the great moments and great decisions in history, that could create an alternate reality, right? What if Hitler had won World War II?
Right.
What if the South had won the Civil War and there
Right.
were still slaves in America? This is an alternate reality. And again, often science fiction writers like to kind of play with those ideas.
Right.
These dystopian, these sort of terrible, hopeless future narratives, like wool, tend to have some common elements. So whether it's wool, whether it's Hunger Games, as you mentioned, Matrix, Blade Runner, Fallout, The Road, that Cormac McCarthy book that was popular that also became a movie about a future, awful future world. They often have some common elements. There's some things you often see through these, no matter if they're in the next, they're set in the next 100 years of history or 500 years in the future. A terrible future is a terrible future, and there's often some common things that are terrible in these futures. These include dreadful environmental disasters that disrupt the world order. There you go. Environmental collapse. There's no more food on the planet. The rains don't fall. The earth turns into a dry, lifeless desert. Zombies come along. Who knows? This is all awful, horrible, or dreadful. I think dreadful is just really bad. But you kind of look at it a little more accurately, saying it is full of dread. And dread is like great fear of the unknown. But you could also just say, oh, that food was dreadful. The guy put in sugar instead of salt. Or something like that. It was just really terrible. I didn't feel fear. I just thought it was awful. But you could also talk about dreadful, getting a terrible medical diagnosis is dreadful. It fills you with fear and hopelessness and terror and things like that. So you might have that, an environmental disaster, that's common. Totalitarian governments that carry out constant surveillance. So governments that spy on you and control your life and your decisions. Think of 1984. That famous George Orwell book, for example, surveillance being the watching of someone to make sure that they are not doing things that are wrong, whatever wrong might be. So spying on you with your phone or with cameras, neighbors spying and reporting on neighbors. Think of, the Cultural Revolution in China or Russia under Stalin or the modern world, in fact, with a lot of our technology doing either known surveillance or secret surveillance. They always say my phone isn't listening to me, but I'm not convinced. So this is the kind of thing we wouldn't really like to have. We wouldn't like to live in a future like that. And the loss of individual freedom. So again, no freedom of speech, no freedom to choose your own politicians, no freedom to live your life or say things or be the person that you want to be. If you do, you're going to get in trouble and maybe get sent off to prison for a long, long time.
And that is dystopia, right? So dystopian stories closely examine or look at the struggles faced by individuals under tight control, like that totalitarian surveillance, prompting them to question and defy the current system. So they are questioning what is right, what is wrong, In the case of silo, can I go outside? Why can't I go outside? What is being hidden from me? I bet it's okay out there. And define the current system. So the current system in silo would be, the folks inside the silo at the top of the political chain who are saying, don't talk about what's outside the silo. We don't talk about that. If you do, you're going to get sent out there and you're going to die. So when you defy something, you fight against what is there. So here you're defying the current system. You're fighting against the current system. You're not obeying. The purpose of dystopian fiction is more than just to entertain, right? It's not there to just make you go, ha, 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 ha. No, it acts as a mirror reflecting the possible extreme consequences of existing social issues. So if you're in a dystopian world where you have the totalitarian government, look at what's going on. Look in the mirror. Understand what can happen in that sort of a situation. There are extreme consequences when there are, big problems that are going on in the world. And if we take it away from just the dystopian science fiction stories or dystopian fiction stories and put it into existing social issues that are going on in the world today, there's a quote that I like that says, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. A couple of English politicians are said to have said it based on writers of the time. And it just means that if you have power, you're likely to be a bit rotten. But if you have absolute power or total power, it tends to really cause you to be absolutely 100% nasty and bad. And that's the thing that you might want to look in the mirror and ask yourself, do I want to have that absolute power? And we're in a world today where there's lots of situations where there's probably some people we wish didn't have that absolute power.
Absolutely. So there you go. We have this entertainment factor in dystopian fiction because it is entertaining, in the same way that a scary movie might be entertaining and we know, it's not that bad. But it's also supposed to get us to think about how far away are we from that terrible dystopian future if we give up our freedoms, if we let our leaders tell us what they want us to do because not being told what to do is a little scary, if we give up those rights because of our own fears, then what kind of future is that going to bring? And once you give up all your rights and freedoms, how do you get them back when you decide that you don't want one person to control your whole life? That's not easy. So each step taken by the characters in the story, no matter which story it is, but each step taken by the characters in the story inspires readers to critically assess our social values. Basically, to think about your social values, to critically assess something. To assess something is kind of to judge it, right? To evaluate it, to measure it against other things and go, is this good? Is it bad? Do I like it? Is it better? Is it worse than others? And to do it critically is to do it while thinking. Basically, you're not just saying, I like it, so I'm going to do it. Or I like it, or it's the way it is, so that's just the way we'll leave it.
Or Joe likes it, so I like it.
Joe likes it, so I like it. I'm being told to like it by other people. No, you're actually thinking for yourself, and you're taking in information to make accurate and illustrative or educational comparisons with other things.
Analytical.
Yeah, analytical as well. So analyze your social values, critically assess your social values, think about your values, think about why they're your values, why they're important, think about what it would mean to lose those and what dangers to those values might exist around at that time. And don't just kind of assume, and I think that's a problem the world has today. We just assume that democracy is just there and freedom and human rights are just there and that's the way they'll always be. No, people fought long and hard for hundreds of years to get freedom, democracy, human rights, and they aren't always there. They have to be defended every single day at every single turn. Otherwise, we could be living in that future dystopia. It says such stories teach us to steer clear of the dystopian visions portrayed and work toward a more hopeful future. Cherish and value what we have now because, hey, look at that TV show, look at that movie. That might be what it would be like if we don't have them, and we want to steer clear of this dystopian future. To avoid it, to steer clear is in the same way that you turn your car wheel quickly to, not hit that rock in the middle of the road or whatever it is. You want to steer clear of danger. You want to avoid it because once you get into trouble or danger, nothing good will happen.
And that is some deep and dark thoughts that we've gotten to today. So let's take a moment now and listen to our Chinese teacher one more time.
所以反乌托邦我们现在大概就可以有一个概念啦，基本上就进到第3段。 第3段的第一句就告诉我们反乌托邦是什么意思，基本上就是一个充满冲突、充满恐怖跟绝望的一个社会。所以为了要创造出一个另外一种现实的一种很严酷的未来，像是羊毛记这种反乌托邦的一些故事啊，往往就会具有一些共同的元素。什么样的元素呢？第3段的第3句我们特别注意一下，这些元素就是重点哦，包括可能是扰乱世界秩序的可怕的环境灾难啊，或者是实施持续监控的一些集权政府啦，甚至是个人自由的丧失啊。那这几种元素都是反乌托邦文学很重要的一些 elements。 当然在这句话当中有限定用法的关系子句，例如说在第一个受词 include 的第一个受词 dreadful environmental disasters，后面的 that 到句点这边，再到逗点这边的 order 就是第一个限定用法关系子句，修饰 include 的第一个受词。那逗点之后的 governments 之后，从 that 到逗点也可以左右括号起来。那逗点之后第3个受词 the loss 什么的失去呢？从 of 到句尾的地方也可以左右括号。不过后面这里的 of加名词，这是一个形容词片语，它就不是子句了。最后面我们第3段也有特别提到，其实像是反乌托邦的这种故事啊，通常都会关注于个人受到严格控制之下所面临的一些 struggles 努力啦，或者是挣扎，所以会质疑对抗当前的制度。那其实我们也会知道说，在这个世界上我们也有看到很多元的文化，虽然有很棒的民主，但是也有不少的集权的这个国家或者是这个君主专制的情况产生。所以这些文学作品，比如说我们提到的反乌托邦的小说，不只是 entertain， 不只是要娱乐我们，甚至它也是一个镜子，就可以反映我们现在的社会如果走到极端可能会带来哪一些的问题。这就是第4段特别提醒我们的地方。当然我们在第4段的第一句有看到一个限定用法关系子句的简化，前面的先行词是 a mirror， 其实它就是一个镜子。这个镜子如何呢？从 reflecting 一直到句尾可以左右括号，这里的 reflecting 还原变成是关代的 which 或者是 that 跟原本动词的 reflects。 所以文学作品真的不只是有娱乐，甚至是电视剧啊，或当我们追剧的时候，有时候都可以看到对于社会现实的一些反省或者是写照。希望大家都有一些深刻的了解咯。我是安娜，我们下次见。
Hey, Mike, guess what I'm doing?
You're meditating for a brighter future?
I'm looking for that utopia, man.
Oh,
Looking
okay.
for it.
Well, I have a copy of the book if you want to borrow it.
Hope you enjoyed today's story, guys. We will see you again next time for English Digest. I'm Leah.
I'm Mike.
See you later.